Welcome to the Freight Markets Summit. Today we are joined by North Winship, president of Shiplify. Welcome to the summit, North.
Thanks for having me, Mary. Glad to be here.
I'm excited. Today we are getting into all things LTL, which for those that are not as hip to the LTL scene, it's a cool little market. It's a cool section of the freight world. On my opinion, underrepresented. We need to get LTL out there. People need to know that it's more than just the little baby trailers moving around. Before we get too far into that, though, let's get some background on you and how you got started at Shiplify.
Well, I have a pretty simple origin story. I basically graduated college right when my dad was starting Shiplify, and I was like, well, I can go and find a real job and be a normal person, or I can tag along with my old man and learn a little bit about LTL, the industry, and then really kind of where we slot in, which is accessorial identification. So pretty simple, not rocket science.
But it falls into one of those two categories that I think everyone in supply chain has. It's either a family business that you just kind of end up in, or you don't necessarily go seeking out supply chain. It finds you, and logistics says, hey, you can come to us, and then you're never allowed to leave. But it does kind of bring that. It just kind of bring my crazy theory that you're firmly in one of the two camps.
Yeah, I have been infected with LTL, and it will never leave my blood at this point.
Yes. And honestly, you know probably way too much about it for any reasonable person, to the point where people, when you're inevitably on road trips, are probably like, hey, we don't care about the details of that truck over there.
You would be surprised. My wife is like, I don't care about that truck on the road. And I'm like, I do, and you should. For a lot of reasons.
That is a very common thing in our car rides as well. It's like, hey, like go speed up a little bit. I want to see what carrier this is, or like I want to see where they're domiciled. And it's like, we don't care. Like we do not care. Or like, oh, they're from Montana. What are they doing out here in like Ohio?
Exactly.
Again, very niche things that other people are really just like, we don't care.
We had somebody I know somebody who with their kids, they play trucking company bingo, and they'll do a draft on car rides, and they'll basically pick different trucking companies, and every time they see a truck on the road, they wind up checking it off and see who can get bingo first.
That's a really great idea. I have to do some traveling soon, so I think I might make my own bingo card. I know it's designed for children, but it is what it is. So let's kind of get into what we're talking about today. So today's the Freight Market Summit. We're looking at all the different aspects of freight markets. We've had the rail, we've had maritime, we've had full truckload, but LTL, it's important. I think it needs a spot on here. So let's kind of get into it. The last big LTL's kind of had two big updates lately. Well, not really lately. Basically, we had Yellow unfortunately meet their demise a couple years ago, and we're still kind of seeing the shakeout of that, of like different trailers or different equipment gets sold, different facilities, et cetera, et cetera. They're kind of still cleaning that up, and I think a couple weeks ago they just finally said, okay, this is it, this is the full liquidation plan. And so that was really kind of like arguably one of the biggest shakeups that we've seen. And then most recently, we've seen the not the FMCSA, the NMFTA handle the reclassification of goods. So basically, before it used to be you got an item code and that told you what class it was at, and that affected the pricing. That's the very short story of it. And now it's just based off of weight and density. But we are, as a result of kind of these changes and all of the things in the LTL market, we're seeing a lot more investment in that LTL market, whether it's carriers and infrastructure and technology. We're seeing a lot more, what I like to see, like that overhaul, that advancement there. So what are some of the biggest investments that you're seeing that people are making in the LTL market? Is it just to kind of accommodate some of the new changes happening, or is it just a lot of things that are a long time coming?
From my perspective, it seems like carriers have been and continue to invest in new technology and their people, and ultimately, at anytime you hear anybody speak on a panel or anything else like that, that tends to be where carriers focus seems to be, is we are going to continue to invest in our people first, um, and ultimately, if they get that right, they continue to keep their employees happy. Everything else like that, service levels remain high, um, and ultimately, it's great for their end customer. From a technology standpoint, I think they have been investing and will continue to invest in various different technologies that have been available for a while, or start to become more readily available. We've seen a lot of investment in new technologies surrounding AI, whether that's agents or whether that's, I don't know how much carriers are investing in AI agents, but dimensioners, routing and optimization platforms that are becoming much more sophisticated, and really help them cover costs or get creative with how they do line haul planning or P&D operations and those sorts of things. And carriers are very willing to invest in technologies like that. Particularly, they can help drive the industry forward, clean up a lot of their operational costs, things like that. Anything to really try to help improve some of their margins.
So one of the things that back in my day, we had to walk uphill both ways. No, back in the days when I sat in the LTL pricing chair, there was always a lot of questions around accessorials. And so obviously that's something that you guys handle a lot. And, we're starting to see a lot more carriers, kind of move to their own rate base and kind of really control the base rate for freight. And that's where, with the new NMFC classifications, that like the rate base is really locked in. So like there's like that what it would charge to move from point A to point B with nothing else with nothing else that gets added to it, nothing weird, no residential delivery, no lift gate, no nothing like that. It would be X amount of dollars. And so that is really staying, and that we're getting some more transparency around. And it's just, that is really locked in. But where there is a lot of, I don't want to say flack, but there's a lot of confusion is around those accessorials, because the thing is, you can have like all the carriers obviously have their accessorials listed in their rules tariff. So that's something you can find on the carrier's website, or ask your carrier for, and they'll give it to you. But within individual pricing contracts, you can negotiate some of those accessorials. And so when you're able to negotiate some of them down, it really kind of makes you wonder, like, okay, well, like, is this just another profit center for them? Like, does it really cost them $109 to send someone out to this zip code for a limited access or a rural delivery? So that's where I think there's a lot of, I don't say confusion, but more just kind of like, what are these charges? So why... do you think that carriers are kind of using accessorial charges and increases to accessorials? Do you think that's like a profit center for them? Do you think that's another way to increase margin? Or is it just kind of like the cost of business is increasing, so like we have to keep up with these extra charges that cause us to deviate from the norm of our network?
I think it's carrier independent. Every carrier kind of looks at this stuff the same, or excuse me, every carrier looks at this stuff differently, and they have different ways that they want to approach some of this. Some of them may look at it as, okay, this is a good way to drive some revenue and increase profits. But at the end of the day, every single one of them is going to look at their costs of service, and take a good look at, okay, where are those costs coming from? And in our little world that we live in, a lot of these accessorials that we identify are at pickup and delivery, and are typically location characteristic driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think carriers, are going to want to do a good job of understanding what are the costs with each individual type of delivery. I think what winds up happening is, okay, they categorize these different types that they charge for. Is this a residential delivery? There's a cost associated with that. Okay, we're gonna bucket residential deliveries here. Okay, limited access. They lump all of these different types of locations into that, whether it's because there are secured facilities like military bases or prisons, and that increases stop times. It's harder to find the actual delivery point. Maybe there's a security inspection that needs to take place, or there are just some other places where they show up and it's a non-normal delivery. You're not bumping a dock. There aren't people there ready to receive the freight. It could be a CVS pharmacy. It could be a funeral home, whatever else. It's or it could be a car dealership where they have increased liability pulling onto that lot. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of it, carriers are going to look at those different types of things differently. And the simplest way for them to handle and accumulate those costs are by applying these accessorials kind of on the back end. From a shipper perspective, if you've got the more data you can share with the carriers during your bid process, RFPs, upfront at the time of quote, whatever else, the more accurate initial quotes you're going to get, the better pricing maybe not better pricing, but more accurate pricing you're going to get. And it's going to be tailored to your network and the breakdown of your freight and all of those sorts of things. And ultimately, if you can do a good job of getting them the information that they need up front, wherever you're doing that, whether it's in the bid process or at the time of quote, you're going to have far fewer surprises on the back end. And the carriers, they are running for-profit business, right? So they're going to cover their costs. They're not going to come do this, or you show up and you pay for the lift gate, but then you ask the driver for, can you just bring this inside for me? Well, they're going to charge you for inside delivery because that's time, labor, effort, increased liability, all of those sorts of things. So I do think the carriers sometimes, like, it could be, to answer your question after 20 minutes of rambling, it could be some carriers do look at it as a profit center, but I don't think that's the general intent of these fees. I think a lot of times they have a lack of information up front when they need to make decisions about how to price this particular shipment. And ultimately, this is a good way for them to ensure they, at minimum, cover their costs. At maximum, maybe it is a profit center. But ultimately, I don't think that's the general intent. I think
you bring up a very good point, and that is they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. So like if you say okay, well, like you're going to have a limited access delivery. Well, there's a huge difference between dropping off at a prison versus dropping off at a storefront that just doesn't have a dock, like that just drops off at like an Advanced Auto Parts. Like they don't have a dock, but you just need to pallet jack a few things off and use a lift gate and you're good to go. That's a lot different than like having to go through a security check, having to do all these other things. And that's something that I saw firsthand when I did LTL pricing was, the more specific we could get, the pictures of freight that we could send, anything else that we could include as information for the carriers, we got better pricing. We got more favorable accessorials because it takes away that risk. The same way that like if you're a shipper and you're like, okay, well, I want to deal with this carrier, but I don't know anything about them. Like the same way that you're going to investigate and find their safety scores, the last inspection they had, the same way that you're going to do your due diligence, the carriers have to do that back. So if they say, we don't know what we're walking into, we're going to hedge our bets and we're going to go the maximum to protect ourselves because we don't know what we're walking into. Versus if you're like, oh yeah, it's like a lift gate adjacent. Like there's a dock, but not really, but also like it's a plastic freight, so it doesn't really matter if it gets damaged because you can just pop it back out, versus I have to ship Fabergé eggs. So it's really that you don't know what you don't know, and it's just kind of hedging your bets, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then with e-com just becoming more and more prevalent, people being far more willing to order a couch off of Wayfair, and a lot of these, the more you can do to share your information really about your pickup and delivery networks or your customer base with the carriers, primarily during the bid process, the more accurate they can get. Like there are anecdotal stories where we've got some carriers that will send us some information and say, hey, this customer told me it's 5, maybe 10% lift gate, and then they'll send it to us, and we kind of look at it and we're like, oh, that looks more like 20%. And if they've made pricing decisions based on the 5%, then they might be operating at a loss on right. Some of that stuff, unless they implement the accessorial fees and that sort of thing. But if you give them good information up front, you want to waive the liftgate accessorial or get it discounted down, well, now they can quantify what their concessions are, make better decisions on their end so they can operate more smoothly.
And you wouldn't think that just that little bit of insight into how something's working, you wouldn't think that is so important and so crucial, but it really is. Because again, it comes back to that you don't know what you don't know. But at the same time, if I know that, okay, you say that it's 10% lift gate, but if I have a third party that's no, it's actually double that or triple that. It takes away that oh yeah, I'm just gonna cheat it down a little bit, and it's probably not that much. Or if you truly are unaware that that's how many shipments you have that are like that, it's nice to have that third party that comes in and is no, here's actually the stats on this.
Yeah, exactly.
So looking forward to, because we've had enough changes on the LTL side of things, from densities and all of that. We're kind of wrapping up some chaos in the LTL world. Looking to 2026, do you see any huge changes coming to pricing or accessorial structures, or do you just kind of expect it to maintain how we were this year?
I think from the accessorial side of things, selfishly, I kind of hope there's not that many changes to it. But ultimately, I think the big LTL news in 2026 is going to be the spinoff of FedEx Freight, ultimately, and how that goes. You mentioned earlier the NMFTA changes that took place back in July. I think everybody was anticipating a whole lot more problems associated with that on kind of the day-to-day. And I think the NMFTA did a great job of getting those changes published, first and foremost, and then carriers and brokers and 3PLs really did a great job of understanding those changes, understanding which of their customers are going to be impacted, and doing a good job of communicating all of those sorts of things. And I as I've been asking around, people are like, we really haven't had, everybody's saying this has gone really well. We really haven't had that many headaches or hurdles or anything along those lines. But looking into 2026, I think both carriers, shippers, 3PLs, everybody's really kind of looking at, where can I get more efficient? What can I automate? A lot of those types of things. And I think we'll see more and more trends towards capturing more data, figuring out how to utilize some of that data to automate some menial tasks that nobody wants to do, or get on the same page, and some of that. So I think there's going to be more and more trends towards automation of some back office function, and then hopefully free up some people's time to go work on some other things, as opposed to disputing a $20 reclass fee and holding up that freight invoice for 60 days and using up carrier resources, broker resources, shipper resources, all of that sort of thing. So, any of the automation there that winds up taking place, I think will be for the betterment of the industry. And I know a lot of TMSs are looking into that. There are tech providers that really help with that. There are constantly new or relatively new companies that are launching products or coming out with new things that can help, automate the invoice all the way through. I don't know if I see that many shifts in how carriers operate or how they handle accessorials different, but in terms of how the industry kind of shifts, I do think there's going to be a lot of automation apply. I don't know if it happens specifically in 2026, but people are
I think it would
that
probably
way.
Start to happen because we are seeing, I am starting to see a lot of, solutions come out that do focus on back office and kind of not necessarily take the attention away from, the carrier sales reps or those kind of on the floor in those profit center or in those margin generating roles. We are seeing stuff on the back office, around auditing, around invoicing, around other stuff like that. And I think that as people kind of start to see that, because it's always hard to justify a back office cost because it's not necessarily like you're not getting that. Those aren't necessarily like margin roles where you can get 30% on every load. But by making those better and automating some of that, you free those people up to handle the problems, to improve things that are going. So you don't have to get in a fight with a carrier for 6 months and say, I'm not changing this. And then they send you to collections and you say, well, last I checked, your customer service was working on this. So figure it out. Not that happened in real life in any way, shape, or form. All right, North. So we are pretty much out of time today. If anyone has any questions about the LTL world or what's happening with us accessorials, where can they find you outside the summit?
You can find me at northw@shiplify.com. I am not afraid to put that out there. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or anything like that. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on FreightWaves what is it? Summit podcast?
No, you're usually on you're pretty regular on Check Call.
But yeah, no, it's I try to make myself readily available. I love meeting new people, connecting with new people, especially really in transportation, but specifically in LTL. So I'll typically be available. I'm not going to ghost anybody.
Well, that's good. We don't want to have to change your name to Casper.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, and stay tuned for the rest of the summit. We have some amazing content coming your way.